So hello everyone, nice to see you, nice to see some people again. We're still waiting. Okay, Nikita is sending us a message in the chat. But I think we'll be gradually floating to the start of our meeting. So today we are having something that I've never had before. How exactly did Nikita put it? Theoretical practicum, which sounds a bit funny, but I think, it's good to have fun. So do type your names in the chat so that we know who we're talking to. And today we are going to discuss that situation that one of you put in the chat several days, maybe weeks ago, about students switching to Russian or talking mostly Russian or trying to translate everything from L1 to L2 and vice versa. And we'll see if it's good or bad, if we should or shouldn't do anything about it, and if we should, then what exactly. Thanks everyone for participating in the poll. It's really interesting to see different opinions, and thanks to Google, we can see what every person thinks, what most of you think. It's, very convenient to gather some data. So if we keep doing that, please continue participating and be active. So what are we going to do today? Let me just remember how I can share my screen. So, we'll look at your suggestions. We'll look at what you think is going on with your students and what you want to change, or maybe you think that using their native language at English lessons is okay. We'll see to what extent we can use some of the ideas. Maybe we'll come up with some new ideas, and hopefully, as actually most of our students have at least one of their goals is to speak English fluently. Hopefully we'll come up with some ideas that could help them to stop using Russian, or at least minimize the use of Russian and switch to English. While we're probably still waiting for someone, let me remind you the situation. So this came from one of our colleagues. Students, especially at lower levels, first translate everything into Russian and then answer the question. Or if they want to say something, first they formulate this idea in Russian and then translate it into English. So what do you think? Should we do something about it? How do you do it? What do you tell your students? That's what we are going to work with today. First, it was interesting for me to know how big is this problem. And as it turns out, sometimes all levels, students of all levels, use Russian or maybe any other first language that you both share at your lessons. Mostly beginners and elementary, sometimes pre-intermediate and intermediate, and occasionally all levels, even upper intermediate students can switch to Russian. Why do they do it? Those would be quotes from your responses. So let's see. We didn't have this question as a separate one, but some of you felt that some explanations would be great, which is highly appreciated. So one of the reasons is that they want to check if they understood some explanations, and they want to explain it in Russian for you to see that they have the understanding. For some students, definitions in our dictionary are rather complicated, and probably in any English dictionary, if we're talking about beginners, elementary students, dictionary definitions would be complicated for them. That's clear. Sometimes they just don't believe in their speaking skills, and if they think it's too hard to say something in English, they answer questions in Russian. Sometimes when they're emotionally involved, they want to say something and they come up with some slang words, emotional words. They say some Russian word. I actually had a similar situation last week, I guess, when one of my students said that so she got a new job and there's a lot of new things for her to do, new software to work with, and no one is really teaching her. So she said that I am learning by the method of tick. Yeah, for us it's understandable, right? Because we speak Russian too. But if she was talking to a foreigner, he would have a hard time understanding her. But you know, this is a common situation. We do use this phrase for such you know, situations when you're just at a loss and no one is helping you. That's how you are learning. And she decided that maybe there's something similar in English. And sometimes when they're looking for a word they don't know, they can start asking you like and using Russian phrases for that. So those are some situations why your students switch to L1. Are there any more situations? Would you like to add anything to this list?
So one of may I?
Of course.
One of my students only today.
Mm-hmm.
It happened only today, and when he made one more pause, very long pause, and I asked, "What are you thinking of?" He said, "I'm trying to make up a sentence in Russian,
Mm-hmm.
then to translate it into English." And I said, "Why are you doing it? So don't you know how to say it in English?" "Oh, well, yes, I do, but first I have to make up a sentence in Russian to understand what I want to say."
That's interesting.
I didn't know what to answer because it was quite reasonable.
Okay, I think we'll come to that a bit later. Now, are there any other situations in which they switch to Russian?
About senior students, especially, sometimes they have this experience from school and from the university when they were educated with the help of translation method, and now it's very difficult for them to be oriented to something else.
That could happen. And I think we have some quotes from your responses about senior students, so we'll talk about them later. So they switch to Russian because they're used to it. Okay, that could be another reason. Right, anything else? Okay.
Sometimes they might not understand the explanations, like the grammar explanations.
So, but that's kind of what the first situation says. Yes, they want to make sure they understand. So chat probably has something interesting other than names as we started discussing. Oh, where's my chat? Okay, it disappeared. Hopefully it appears again. Now let's look at some questions to consider about those situations when they switch to Russian. So first of all, do they need to be able to explain the rule or to use the structure? Let's think about it.
No.
Not just to explain the rule. Just we should show how to use this, but not explain.
How to use exactly. So they don't need to be able to repeat the rule in any language.
No,
In English, in
never,
Russian,
never.
in Kazakh, whatever language they speak, they don't need that. Because they're not going to talk about English grammar to someone. They're going to use it in their free speech. Then my next question is, again, this is a quote that students use Russian to repeat a grammar rule, which I have just explained. Are there any other ways to present grammar other than explanation? What else can we do with grammar?
Yeah, certainly body language and different simple words to explain it maybe differently from the dictionary. There are a lot of ways to explain a word or a structure. I think. No? No?
But still, I can hear the word explain. So other than explain, what else can we do with grammar?
Show?
Just to show the structure, and that's all.
Um,
Give examples and involve into dialogue. Using this example, as we discussed at one of our previous webinars, or maybe not with you, Olga, but with have you ever been to and so this is how.
Okay, so that would be presenting it in context, and they see for which situation we need this or that structure, right? And fundamentally speaking, there's an inductive and a deductive approach to grammar. A deductive approach would be, today we are studying present perfect tense. To form present perfect, we need the verb to have. For he, she, it, it turns into has, and the third form of the verb, if it's a regular verb, and blah, 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 blah. So that would be lecturing, basically. And of course, after such a lecture, the student wants to make sure that at least something got into their head, and they're not able to repeat the same lecture. In English, they would attempt to repeat at least something to you in Russian to show that they got it. But there's an inductive approach. When they see the situation, maybe they listen to some text, maybe they read it, maybe you present some situation, like you start talking about experience. Have you ever done this? Have you ever been there? And then you ask them questions, or you have some like a worksheet for guided discovery. So they answer some questions like, is it something that you do every day? No. Or is it your general life experience? Yes. And they understand for which situation they need the structure. And then you have some questions about the form. And then basically, tadam, you know, they have the pieces of the puzzle together, and they understand that they don't need to repeat anything in Russian. So if you have students who tend to repeat grammar rules in Russian after your explanations, maybe you should change the way of presenting grammar. So try to read something about the inductive approach, about guided discovery. If you start using that, your students might, and probably they will, switch to English during the grammar stages of your lessons. Okay, vocabulary, lexis. Apart from dictionary definitions, what are some other ways to present vocabulary?
Synonyms and opposites.
Synonyms, opposites, okay. We can use
pictures,
really pictures, we can mime, gesture.
Situation, give a situation.
Yeah, situations is the
right,
best.
situations, okay. So I suppose that you all should have access to our webinars on grammar and vocabulary. There are a lot of good tips how to present grammar inductively, how to present vocabulary without definition. So if you need some help, you can refer to those resources. When the student says, как это сказать по-английски, ну вот это вот слово я забыл, can we teach them how to do the same in English?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Of course, all the time.
Yes. So basically, if we put some effort into it, we can eliminate a lot of situations in which they personally switch to Russian. Right, let's continue. Okay, but some teachers do use Russian too, mostly with beginners and elementary. The situation is basically the same, quite often with pre-intermediate and sometimes with all levels, even upper intermediate. Why do you do that? To explain grammar, and we've just discussed it, that there are other ways to do it. To explain their mistakes, if maybe they were writing an essay, and when there is a need. I like this last point, but it's too vague. So let's specify. Those of you who switch to L1 when there is a need. When do you feel that there is a need? What kind of situation could it be?
Students ask. Ask me to, oh, please, Dinara. Oh, yeah, it's like it's a waste of time to explain it or to show it. Or sometimes when I give a situation, they don't understand that I'm actually leading them to to certain structures.
Okay. But what kind of situation could it be when they say, "Please, Dinara, I am lost"?
It's not. Oh, it's even not about grammar. That's more about vocabulary, I guess. Yeah.
So that could be probably
grammar as well. They can want to just to know the explanation of some points of grammar.
Okay, so again, someone mentioned senior students. I think that even younger students are still used to a lot of Russian because our school teachers, unfortunately, switch to Russian whenever they can. So maybe this is one of their expectations. They believe that when it becomes even a bit complicated, the teacher will help them in Russian. So maybe that's why they ask you to do that. Anything else? What could be some other need to switch to Russian?
There is something very complex grammar just to compare with Russian.
Like what? What could be an example of that?
For example, past perfect, something like that, subjunctive mood.
And how does Russian help? Because if we think about any sentence in past perfect, in Russian it will be the same past tense as past simple.
But yes, it is. Of course, it is possible to explain with English words, of course. But if it concerns students with low levels, that it can be possible.
Do low levels study past perfect?
But sometimes they are interested in it. Fortunately.
Okay. How about a timeline? Like by the time they came, the party had already finished. So one point they came, another point the party finished. Yes, and on our timeline, the point when the party finished is further in the past. You know, from pictures, timelines, it's sometimes easier to understand without any explanation.
But maybe it's a good idea sometimes to point at the difference between their L1 and L2. For example,
yes.
The first conditional. Yeah, so like please pay attention that in Russian it works differently, and then they try to compare.
Right. Yeah. If you can compare and it helps them understand, then it's a good idea. Like I had such a situation even when I was not speaking the students L1. Last year I was working with, or actually this year, I was working for a Spanish online school, and I can only say no habla español. This is the extent of my Spanish. But their intonation sometimes is funny. And if it's something like apologizing, they sound not polite. So even if I didn't understand the word, I asked them to say the same sentence in Spanish, like, sorry, I was late because something happened. And when they say it in Spanish, they sound like blah, blah, blah. And when I say the same in English, like, sorry, I'm late because I was delayed somewhere, just, you know, to compare the sound of the sentence and see. So this sounds as if you're not really happy about what happened, and you feel uncomfortable that you made the person wait, but it's like, it's like you don't care. And they understood it, so it was a group, yes, and they started using the correct intonation, though it's very different from their language. So if you can make some comparisons and they help, then it's a good idea, of course. But still, we have some questions to consider. So apart from presenting grammar in a different way, there's another thing. How is your TTT doing? Teacher talking time. Is it okay? Is it not too much? And if you explain grammar and then you explain some new words, maybe you don't leave enough time for your student to speak. And maybe there are ways to make them do the talking. So again, inductive approach to grammar means that they have to come up with some ideas, even if they say yes, no, replying to a question, still they participate. Or sometimes you can just ask them some questions, and they can, make this guided discovery by themselves, and it's not a lecture, it's an active work of your student. If it's about presenting grammar, presenting vocabulary, or there is a need for something, we can always think, are there ways to do the same in English, like with that timeline? Yes, maybe instead of the explanation, we can draw some pictures. Maybe we can, well, okay, there is a need is a very broad notion. So whatever need comes up, we should think, can I help my student without speaking Russian? Can I stick to English and still make it clearer for the student? So think about it when you switch yourself, and maybe you'll be able to do it not so often. Okay, what about translation? We had a separate question about that. Do you offer them such activities? And this is what we got. Of course, a lot of teachers said that, no, I don't do that. But there are some ideas here that sometimes, basically with senior students. Why? Maybe we've discussed it because they expect that. Another opinion, I offer students to translate new vocabulary at the beginning of each lesson in order to refresh their memory. Which is good to work with new vocabulary, but we'll have a separate question about that. Another opinion is that it's good for their reading and speaking practice, at least at the early stages. One of the best options to train grammar and vocabulary knowledge. And I like this last point, with those students whose facial expression doesn't show anything like understanding. Well, any more opinions for using translation? If you use that, what is your reason why?
It can be interesting idioms or set expressions.
Mm-hmm.
We have some different logics in Russian and in English, so we can help to translate.
With idioms, it would be interesting, but then you're not like translating directly word for word. Yes, you are finding equivalence.
No, that is why we use translations. Just offer them to find the real translation in Russian.
Are they not getting confused with that? Because then they might just remember the Russian phrase and try to translate it back to English word for word. No?
Sometimes.
Okay. So I have some questions about these points. First of all, about well, I probably don't remember the order of my slides very well, but okay. So another point from our poll is how helpful translation generally is. 12.5% think that it helps the student. Are there any people among us today who voted for translation, that it helps the student?
That was not me.
No one? No?
So well, coming back to our senior students, yeah, I think that this is the point for discussion, especially about senior students who are sometimes get very much scared of the amount of English I use at the lesson, and just I have to switch from English to Russian quite often, just because not to scare them away. yeah, I have noticed this when I took just two students at the same time, two elementary students at the same time, and one of them is over 50 and another one is just 30 something. Yeah, and
so 30 something is a senior student now.
No, no. I'm just giving the example of this difference.
Okay.
So, the younger one got used to my classroom expressions in English. Just I mean the second lesson, the third one maybe. But the older one is still getting used to my classroom language, and sometimes I just see that she still doesn't understand it, and I have to translate it 1 month later, or maybe more. So this is the point of, especially for senior students, I think.
Okay, so we do agree that this is one of their expectations, that the teacher will be using a lot of Russian, or at least some Russian. But another question is it easy for them, for senior students, to switch to English? No.
Not really. In fact, I have one senior student. She is more than 60 now, and for her it's very difficult. Even she is preparing some speeches for every lesson, to begin and to finish the lesson, to say some words of gratitude to me, and so she's preparing it every time.
Okay. So it's not a secret that for senior students it's difficult to start thinking in English, to start using new methods that they're not familiar with, just because, well, that's life. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible, and if some processes in their brain are getting a bit slower, it doesn't mean that they stop or they don't function or something else. But we know that they might have, and most of them do, have a completely different understanding of what an English lesson should look like. So they expect grammar translation, they expect a lot of exercises like filling the gaps. They don't expect you to talk to them freely about something that's interesting for them. But, you know, most of the things that we offer them is fun, right? And if we try to maintain a positive atmosphere, if we show them that even if we speak English, it can be still understandable. So you can use a lot of miming and gestures and talking to them like little kids. That would probably work. If you downgrade your language, speak slowly, show something with your fingers, like tick off some points. Even if they switch to English, especially when they just start working with you, you can stick to English. In most cases, they will understand you. And switching between languages, if you read about it, about the anatomy of this process, it's very complicated. There are 4 points in our brain that take part in it. So can you imagine your poor neurons that are running around your brain like crazy, you know, and then the opposite direction. So that's hard. If you switch between languages, it's hard. And professional interpreters, they have a lot of training for that. And people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, it's difficult for them to do it, you know, because they're not trained for that. So I would say that on the other hand, I saw some discussion in our Skype group that students treat teachers like some service providers, like manicurists. Senior students still have respect for teachers.
Oh, yeah.
So if you explain why we are doing that, they will probably agree with you and they will be willing to try. So let's take a risk. Okay. The idea to use translation to revise vocabulary at the beginning of the lesson. What is the main function of our warm-up stage?
to immerse the students into the language, into the English atmosphere.
So English atmosphere. So is it a good idea to use translation at this stage?
Oh no.
No, not at
Why
all.
not?
The simple words and phrases and only English. So
because they
Or
need
map loses its sense as it is.
Yes, they switch from Russian into English. Yes, they start thinking in English, hopefully. You introduce the topic, you create this positive atmosphere, and if it's translation, it's hard to switch because you keep switching languages and English might not stick. So there are thousands of games how to revise vocabulary using English. We all have the internet, yay, we can find out what else we can do other than translating. Okay, another question. What are the 4 skills our students have to master? That would be
speaking,
speaking, listening, reading,
and writing.
Is there translation among them?
No.
So while translation is not always harmful, damaging, it's not a requirement. So there's hardly a student who will have to translate something. They mostly need to speak, to write their emails, to maybe answer some phone calls, but not translate things for people. Otherwise, they would be getting some professional education. So someone said that it helps with reading. So if we remember the types of reading that we are working with, that would be skimming, scanning, and detailed reading. Can translation help with that?
No.
Why not?
You don't need to translate while you're reading. For what?
Right, because
it should be some mechanism. Some mechanism should work in your head without any translation. It's the same topic. How you should feel what you're reading. You should feel more than translate. It's different things, different mechanism.
Yes, so for example, when you are skimming, you are it's impossible to do this and translate every word. When you are scanning, you are like ice cream. Yes, you found the word that you're looking for. Don't need the other words. You are just looking for the picture of this word. And even detailed reading, you are still searching for some particular information. You don't have to know the translation of every word just to find what you need. So it doesn't develop reading skills that we use in real life. That's why, well, translation doesn't help in developing reading skills. About the best way to practice grammar and vocabulary. Have you ever met a student who knows all the rules? If you ask them, they will tell you that they S and so on. They know the words. If you give them this translation activity at the beginning or any other stage of your lesson, they can do it. They know the words, but they can't speak.
Yeah, of course. There are some cases.
Why does it
happen? A lot of them, I think.
Yeah. Why?
Because this is the main problem. The main problem. Our main task is to make a student speak, not to be afraid of speaking, and to use all their knowledge in practice. So.
It's actually a very difficult question, because if to speak about that, we can ruin all the methodology for learning English, because it's not good. It's my opinion to start learning any language with grammar, with logics, because imagine you are just were born, and your mom or your dad never told you, for example, Ola, this is Mishka. Mishka is
this is Ola.
Yeah, for example, sorry, this is Mishka, the первое склонение, единственное число. This is for Russian. Then never. But how, Olga? How did you learn Russian?
That's different. The mechanisms for
this is the most difficult language. How did you learn it?
That's different. The mechanisms for acquiring L1 and learning L2 or 3 or 7, they are different. first of all, children, they have this, natural acquisition. They can, like a sponge, they can absorb something just because people are talking around them and people are talking to them. And I've heard this Mishka thousands times before I started using.
Yes, exactly. You heard it thousands times.
Yes, but our students, first of all, their acquisition window is closed. It closes at puberty. They don't have that much time and they don't have that much exposure. So it's like, not really relevant to compare that. What was the initial question? Yes, why can't they speak if they know the rules and words? And I see that there are some silent people here. So how about Irina? Yes, Irina, who is smiling mysteriously, whose camera is on.
Why can't they speak? Maybe because they translated a lot and did the exercises like fill in the gaps. And this was the experience they just used to it. And I have a lot of students of this kind who say just let's read the rule and fill in the gaps and that's it. But they still cannot talk. So I try to exclude those exercises from our lessons and do something more creative where they have to express themselves, to talk as much as possible.
Because that's safe. They have to basically choose one word, put it in the gap, and ta-da! Well done.
And they say everything is green, everything is correct, but when they are in real life, they cannot remember what was that sentence about. What did I just fill in?
Right. There are no gaps in real life. You have to produce your own sentences. So what should we do with them? How to make them speak?
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Join in.
Yeah. So as always, I always tell my students speaking is a skill which you need to develop separate from other. I mean, incomplete, right? It's a skill, and you cannot just by reading you will not be able to speak. So if you want to speak, you gotta try it. And I always encourage them, even if you don't know how to say the whole sentence, say partially in English, then I'll help you. And yeah. So by encouraging them speaking, I said another thing I told my students is here we are to practice English, not to practice Russian. And the more you learn here at the lesson, the better you will feel, more comfortable you will feel in real life. And then create again positive atmosphere. Encourage your students, like, okay, you made a sentence, good job. Go ahead. And then with the time, actually, I've noticed that it's easier to take someone who's a lower level and teach him, like present the speaking and everything from the lower level and to the higher. Then, for example, take some student with high level, but he's already, how to say, used to learning in the wrong way, in translating. Because this system, another mistake, they don't think, they don't learn to think in English. A lot of, or many students, they think first in Russian and then they convert it, and it takes a lot of time. They convert it into English. So I always tell them, just try to use form structure right away. Try to think in English, not waste time, because in real life you will not have this time. Like don't tell, you wouldn't say like, wait a minute, I need to to think about it, I need to translate and then give you the answer. So
right, exactly. So they can do gap filling or translation or whatever until they're blue in the face, but it doesn't make them speak.
Another thing that I use, may I add?
Yes.
Like I tell them from the beginning that I don't speak Russian.
But you
so
do.
if they want, well, I'm actually, they say, I live here, I'm in Russia. Actually, I'm not in Russia. So I tell them like, well, you may speak Russian, but I am very bad at Russian. So I won't understand you if you try to explain me anything in Russian. So switch to English. use your gestures, bring your message to me because my Russian is bad.
Do they believe you?
Well, yes, I think, because we very rarely switch to Russian. Just when there are some.
With Irina. I'm sorry. So I do exactly the same, but I make it as a joke. So when somebody's speaking Russian, I say like, "What? I don't understand. Is it an English or Russian language? Are we studying English or Russian today?" So and they start speaking English. So they have no choice.
Okay, so we'll turn to that later. And here I have one more question left. ICQs and CCQs, so instruction comprehension and concept comprehension questions. Have you tried using those?
Maybe you can tell some more words about what they stand for.
So read the text and answer these questions. Do you need to understand every word to answer those two questions? No. Do you read like yes, that would be ICQs. Yes, you clarify your instruction. Or like, how much time do you have? Like, read this text in a minute and answer these two questions. So from in a minute, the students should guess that it's some fast reading, like skimming. And then you make sure that he still remembers about 1 minute. Like, so how much time do you have? 1 minute. Okay, that would be instruction comprehension. Or concept comprehension. Let me see some abstract word here. Like chilly. It's winter, yeah. Oh, so it's chilly outside. About maybe around 0. So when I say it's chilly, is it warm? No. Is it very cold? Awfully cold? No. But still not very pleasant. Yes. Yeah, that would be concept comprehension. Why are they good for us? Because even if a student is not able to explain the word in English or repeat your instruction in English, and they shouldn't be able to, they don't need that. They can always answer simple questions like yes, no, 1 minute, big, small, something that requires only one word. Again, there's plenty of information about that. Read, find something. We've been working with those in our vocabulary and classroom management webinars. Not we've been, but we used to. Yeah, we used to work with those types of questions. If you have access to the webinars, you can check what you can find there. Okay, and we are going further. So the question is L1 always bad? Is it a disaster if you say a word in Russian or your student does the same? No, not always. If you use it to meet some of, not all of the students' expectations, but some of, because even if your 65-year-old student wants to hear a lot of Russian, do a lot of translation and never speak, well, that won't be very productive. That's not how the school works, and that's not what you usually do. So for them to feel comfortable, it's okay if you say something in Russian because that's what they expect from you. Otherwise, they would not feel this individual approach, but not all the time. Yes, there should be some reasonable limit. And of course, not all students have such expectations because now more and more schools start using English only, and younger students would have a different expectation that the teacher never switches to Russian. Sometimes you can use it to save time. Yes, if there is some idiom and you have to invent a whole story, a whole fairy tale to describe it, and when you can say that this is like Dva sapaga para or something, oh, great. Yes, so the student understands you. To build rapport, sometimes it's important. If it's a new student and they have some problem, like they can say that, I'm really shy when I have to speak English, and at work I am just clenching my fists like this under the desk and speak with a lot of difficulty. they will probably do it in Russian. And it's okay if you reply in Russian because it's, you know, more personal this way. We discussed comparisons. Yes, make helpful comparisons, but not all comparisons are helpful. If you start translating to show the second and third conditional, there will be no difference at all. Yes, so if you're not sure if your comparison is helpful, the first 3 points are more or less safe, yes, because they are basically, well, save and time is our favorite, yes, but the first and the third one is mostly for some, you know, psychological support for your student, for creating some atmosphere. So that would be okay. All in all, we should remember the following. Our students, believe me or not, they don't speak English. They speak their interlanguage, which is a special system that forms now when they are learning a second language. They do have some features of English, a lot of them, but they also have some features of Russian, like pronunciation, the lack of articles, some funny phrases like the method of tik, and so on. And there are some independent features, some, you know, their personal input into that, like some students misstress the words and it's so fossilized there's no way to kick it out of them. So it happens until they start speaking proper English at some, you know, high level of proficiency, they will be speaking their interlanguage. And this interlanguage has some positive and negative transfer from L1. So what is positive? I'm sure that all our students learned how to read quite easily because they could read in Russian when they started learning how to read in English. There are some international words like cognates, yes, like revolution, a lot of words with Latin origin. They recognize them easily in English. You don't have to explain them, translate them, or whatever. A lot of words with common Indo-European roots, like what would be some water? Yes, water in Russian, voda, Wasser in German, and other languages are also similar. So they usually recognize such words. So that would be positive. Negative would be when they can confuse some words because there's a similar word with a different meaning in their first language, like intelligent. Yes, they think about someone who is polite and well-bred and well-read and so on. Grammar that doesn't coincide, like the lack of articles, that would be negative transfer. So they do speak their first language most of the time. There's no way to deny it. So whether we want it or not, it will influence their English. Yes, and we should take it into account. And of course, the more we use first language, the more negative transfer is, you know, statistically possible to appear. So some ideas that you use that I think may or may not work. So the first one, we've started discussing it. I pretend that I don't understand Russian. Well, I think that if someone's name is Maria Ivanova and she says, I don't speak Russian, sorry. How realistic
I think
is
it's
that?
a big difference between native speakers as teachers and us as teachers, and it can only be used like a joke.
Right,
Maybe.
it can be.
So just pretend. Let's pretend that I'm not Russian. Yeah.
Oh, where are you from, Irina, by the way?
I'm from Moldova.
Oh, okay.
My first language is Romanian. Then I studied English in school. And Russian I learned just because my neighbors speak Russian.
Okay. Okay, well, in your situation,
so it's not a joke. That's a real situation, and they have to stick to it.
Okay, but I think with most of us, it's not the case, and we do speak Russian, and they know that. But again, we pretend. At the lesson, we pretend all the time. We pretend that we're interested in those people we're reading about, and so on. So they can accept it as a rule, or you can make some big eyes like, "Oh, what language am I speaking here?" Oh, you know, make it funny. Maybe impose some fine on them if they start switching to Russian. They have some I don't know.
Or
Tell
otherwise,
you
you can
something else.
praise them by the end of the lesson
Yeah,
that
you can praise. Mhm.
you did good job today because
Oh,
you
yeah.
switched to Russian just once or twice, and positive reinforcement.
Yeah, positive reinforcement, or some it could be some funny punishment in a negative way. Like I remember once I had just remembered because I can see snow around. I had a group of children, and when they were, I actually came up with it around Christmas when they caught someone speaking Russian. They had to sing Jingle Bells, and it was funny.
Oh, yeah.
So you can make them say something in English, maybe some tongue twister with the sound that they're struggling with, so it would be some extra help. Yeah, so even if you do understand Russian, there could be some funny rule that you don't. Okay. Someone wrote, the most obvious tool is to ask not to use Russian. Right. So we can just do that. We've basically wasted an hour here. Does it always work when you tell your student, we're learning English here, so please let's not use Russian? And from now on, the student never speaks a word in Russian.
Yeah, of course not.
Why not? Why not?
Because you have always tendency to switch to your native language. It's easier to express yourself, and even though sometimes students try really hard not to, but they go because it's easier, and they know that we understand Russian. So Russian is the language that we both know very well, and there's always tendency to switch to Russian. It was years ago. Was I'm talking from personal experience also when I was learning English. And if I knew that the person understands Russian, I would always use maybe a phrase or something that I forgot this word or phrase in English, but I'm like, I know this person understands Russian, so I would use Russian words to again like, and he's like, yeah, save up time or maybe express better, even though I don't want to use Russian, and sometimes I had to because I knew the person would understand me 100%.
Okay. Yes, so when we just ask them, it may or may not work. They can accept this rule right away, or sometimes it could be difficult for them because, again, point one, they do know that you speak Russian. Another way that I'm not completely sure that it works at all, that for the student to speak without pauses, the teacher says it's okay to insert some Russian word in your English sentence. So I would like to hear someone who hasn't spoken yet. So Zamira, how about you? What do you think of this idea? Hello, Zamira. Are you with us?
This last statement reminds me of the joke, like an anecdote when Russian immigrants came to United States and they were asked to study English there, and they just started to paraphrase or to use the endings from Russian words when they spoke English. Будцы напутонили and went to school face them up table, something like that. So when you don't know the Russian word, the English word, they still used a kind of equivalent which they forced from Russian.
Okay, so probably not the best way. Victoria, hello, are you with us?
Yes, hello. I'm very sorry. Just my child is sleeping. I cannot speak really.
Okay, so whose child is not speaking, is not sleeping, sorry, and who hasn't spoken yet? Please join in. So what do you think about this approach to put some Russian words inside English phrases? Maybe we have the author of this idea.
But sorry, maybe I have heard. What for? Just to understand this phrase?
Well, it's hard for me to say because it's not my idea.
Well, I think it's because like you don't want to have long pauses. The teacher just encourages you say the Russian word and just finish the phrase. And that's actually what my teacher has told me, but it's not my phrase.
So I believe that if they do the same in some non-Russian speaking environment, they won't be understood. They can't paraphrase, yes, but we can teach them. And we can start as slow as the beginner level. Because they study something very basic, like, I don't know, big, small. So you can play this antonym game, not big, small, not cold, hot, yes, and they learn how to paraphrase in this way. Right. Let's continue. So, how to stop students from translating? You have very interesting ideas. One of them is the following. To encourage them a lot, to build confidence, to tell them that they can do it, that they know enough, they can do well. They shouldn't be afraid of mistakes. That's a very good idea, because if you support your students, if you believe in them, someone mentioned positive reinforcement, it works. Because, well, our school system, unfortunately, is based on negative feedback. If you show a school teacher some sentence with mistakes on the board and ask them to give some feedback, what will the teacher do? She will take a red marker and she will start correcting mistakes. She wouldn't say that, oh, this structure is good and this is a very good choice of words. They don't do that. And if you start doing the opposite, if you start noticing what your student can do, it gives them confidence. They do start speaking other than, because why do they construct this sentence? Because they know if they make a mistake, they will be corrected, they will be punished, they will get a bad grade, red ink, and so on. But you want to help them and you should show that. Another good idea is to give support, to give scaffolding. Yes, so some standard structures to build sentences, visual cues, non-verbal communication. Yes, so if they have to speak and they have some clues how to do it, it's easier for them. So that's good to give this kind of language support. Another good idea is to, here it's just, some particular example, to repeat phrases from films, because most of them watch them, yes? So like to learn ready-made phrases, or to learn language in chunks. If they know that can I have is a polite way to ask for something, they will, they won't have to translate it from Russian, because in Russian it's not can I have, yes? It's in the best case, give me please. Which doesn't sound that polite in English. And another good point here is it works because they feel like speaking real English. And that's good for them, because if you remember from our motivation webinar, one of the ways of motivation is to feel the belonging to this group, the group that speaks English. It's good for our students. That's just funny to see that you still use one of our ideas from one of the lifetime webinars. When I had a very Russian-speaking student, I came up with a suggestion to put their Russian in the drawer and lock it there. So how can we generalize it? Sense of humor, it helps. Because quite often they are aware of that they actually have this problem of switching into English, and maybe it's not a universal idea. You can come up with better ones and different ones for different students. But if you use something funny, what does it do for your student? There's such a thing as affective filter. So if the student is nervous, stressed, it just blocks their brain and learning doesn't happen. If you use humor, it means that you don't think that this situation is a big deal. There's nothing to be stressed about if you're laughing, right? So this affective filter is, well, usually we say lower, so it goes down, very, very down, and the information starts getting to the student's brain. So they start learning when they are not stressed and afraid of you and afraid of making mistakes, afraid of themselves. So some light-hearted attitude is good in this situation. We also read some articles. Hopefully all of us did that, because I shared some links. And I think there were even some comments in the group about that. So which ideas sound good to me? If you have anything to add, and I would like everyone to contribute, so what else can we do to stop students from translating every thought in their head? First of all, create positive atmosphere. Show them that they can and they will and they do and we like what they are doing. Give them some positive feedback. Learn vocabulary in chunks. So learn collocations, idioms, some functional phrases, not just separate words, because then they have to, make a lot of mental work, sometimes involving translation, to put individual words together, and they don't always come up with an English sounding phrase using that. Different games to practice definitions, explanations. So we mentioned opposites. One of them would also be an alien. So you pretend to be an alien. Do you know this game? Who knows? Okay, whose child is not sleeping? So Anastasia Kuznetsova, let's play with you. Anastasia.
May I be an alien?
Oh, okay. No, I will be an alien. So Dinara, can you please say any sentence? Any sentence.
Oh gosh, but, so many sentences in my.
You have to remember that I am an alien. My English is not very good, and I don't know many words. So just say any sentence.
Oh, me, Dinara.
It's a very short sentence. Just look around, you say something.
I live on the Earth.
Sorry, I'm an alien. What's the Earth?
Oh no.
So you have to explain. It's the planet.
It's a planet. But if I explain, I think it will become even more complicated to understand me. Okay, it's a planet. It's the third planet from the sun.
Oh, and what's the sun? You can just.
It's a star. It's a star. It shines. It appears in the morning.
Oh, what's the morning?
That's when I wake up. I'm not sure about you, but I wake up.
Okay, so you can see the concept, yes? So you can explain the words from your vocabulary list to each other and guess, or you can explain first with one word, then with two.
Students get really annoyed. Yeah,
but it's funny.
Thank you.
And there are tons of other games to practice explanation, definition, and it will be good for your students. Teach them functional phrases, how to ask for clarification, how to help them understand what you are saying, because believe me or not, yesterday I had the most embarrassing experience when I had to phone to some official place here in the States, and I didn't really understand the lady there, because I can imagine that she is saying the same stuff all day, and she is probably reading it from some script, and she is bored to death, so she's speaking like this. But I don't understand her. And I had to clarify, like, sorry, I didn't really catch that. Can you please repeat? Sorry, I'm not sure I caught the last part of the sentence. Do you mean that I have to blah, blah, blah? Yes, I had to do that. And, that's real life. That's what people have to do when they don't understand. And Russian wouldn't help me here. So they should learn how to ask to clarify, to repeat, to help them with the word. And sometimes when I try explaining something about maybe my country, when there's no relay here, I have to, I don't know the word, but I can describe it, yes, and sometimes people come up with that. Oh, this is something. Yeah, this is something, but a bit different. So at any level, sometimes you are stuck because you don't understand the speaker. Sometimes you are stuck because you don't know the word. And you should be able to deal with such situations. And if you know enough functional phrases for that, you'll be good. Visual support, we've discussed that. Miming, gestures, pictures, videos, whatever helps you. Timelines for grammar, so something that is actually less language, whatever language it is, and more visual. Time to plan in English before speaking. Yes, when we come to our speaking activity, they should have 1 minute, maybe 2, depending on what exactly they're going to do, to plan what they're going to say. Encourage them to make notes in English, and you have a special tool on the platform for that. So if they type something in English, they can use those notes instead of translating in their head. Teach language in context, we've talked about that. It's easier to understand grammar when you see the situation in which it is used. If you teach vocabulary in context, again, you can understand what field it's coming from, and maybe they know some of the words. And again, explanation is not the only tool. There's more to methods of teaching than just lecture the student. So do your homework, do some research, see what else you can do for your students. So do we have anything else to add to this list? Something that you do and something that works with your students that we haven't mentioned yet? Anyone? Any ideas?
No ideas.
No ideas.
Everything is so just. That's enough.
Okay. Well, maybe you have some questions about all that. Or about something else that is still related to L1, but we haven't discussed today.
So I've got a question, but maybe it's just more about psychology. But anyway, it's closely connected with our today's topic. When one of my students says that I'm very lazy, I'm too lazy to use English explanations. I'm too lazy to remember words. I'm very lazy. I'm too lazy to just speaking a lot of English. He's pretty intermediate actually, and I know that. So his knowledge is he's got enough English for this level, but he is too lazy. And I hear this phrase at every lesson, and nothing I can do with it. I tried saying no. He said that he likes playing games. But is it possible to play games all the time and not to get any feedback in English anyway? Maybe he's too stubborn. So I know that it's some different point to discuss. But so speaking about using Russian, he uses Russian all the time, and he always says that he's too lazy to speak English.
Okay, so who has any suggestions?
He manipulates you.
I think so.
Trying to.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My question is, what is he doing at English lesson if he or she, whatever, why here? To learn English or to have fun?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, he does all the exercises excellently, and when I ask him to speak, he speaks English, and so only within the frames of our lesson, within the frames of our exercises. But when I try to speak English on some other topic, or try to ask him questions, he answers in Russian. And when I ask him to give the definition of some word in English, he translates it into Russian because he's too lazy to choose the right English words. So he does everything. He gets 10 points for almost all the home tasks. Yeah, and he uses grammar rules perfectly, almost perfectly. But anyway, he's too lazy to speak English.
I think he's a perfectionist. That's the problem, because he maybe feels like he can't use English as fluently as he uses Russian, and this is the problem for him.
Yeah, probably.
So he refuses to simplify his language.
Yeah, probably this is the problem. He's a perfectionist, and maybe he lacks confidence. And
I
yes,
tend to agree
exactly.
with the second part, that he lacks confidence, because why is he saying that? Oh, I'm so lazy, because he wants some encouragement. He wants you to say that, oh no, I know that
you are not lazy, you're hardworking.
Maybe not hardworking, but you are capable of speaking. You are very bright.
I try to do it. Yeah, I try to do it.
Perfect. He wants to be perfect, but
yeah. So maybe he's afraid of making mistakes, and it's easier to say, I'm lazy, I won't do it, than to make a mistake and feel like an idiot. Yes, so that could be like confidence.
This is what I think. Yeah.
So what can we do? Find some topic that's interesting for him to discuss, and somehow accidentally trick him into speaking
He gets excited every time when we start playing. But sometimes we cannot just play. Not every our life is not just game. Sometimes we have to talk on some more serious points, and I want him to speak.
Well, maybe some game could lead to a discussion about something that you mentioned in the game, if it's interesting.
And he will switch to Russian again. Well,
maybe you can create special psychological situation where you can show him that you are a human being as well, and you also have inferiority complexes, and you can you can be sincere with him. And for example, you can say that I have problems, and to tell him something, to tell about your problems, be very extremely sincere with him, and ask him, for example, to help you in this problem. Just and maybe he will be more relaxed, and he will understand that not just him, all people have something inside to be afraid to show.
And that's a good idea, I think. Yeah, thank you.
We had a webinar on limiting beliefs. If it's still accessible, there's a lot of information that could be helpful to you. Okay, so now I just discovered that we have so many messages in the chat, and they were not visible to me while I was sharing my screen. So if I have some interesting questions here, equivalents for idioms, proverbs, some students really think it's their goal to learn how to translate. Maybe we should talk to them more about it and see that it's not about translation, right? We set rules. Yeah, that's good to set rules. Translation from Russian into English of complicated texts as a home task, including active vocabulary and grammar, is an amazing method to practice the language. But again, what exactly are we practicing? Do they really need this skill? Because translation is a separate professional skill, which is good to have, but mostly in real life they need speaking, reading, listening, and writing. Quite a lot of them, actually, if we need English for work. Something about a teenage student. Russian is the best language in the world, and she would never substitute it with English. Interesting. Well, but with teenagers it's difficult. They sometimes have really strange ideas. And it's hard to convince them that they are not always right. A good question. What should we do if the only reaction is I don't understand you? Start speaking with very, very simple words. If you say, listen, it's very difficult not to understand you. If you say, match the pictures and words, if you show everything, then it's very hard to misunderstand. If you say tick off and you show how to tick off, or click, you know, so use a lot of gestures, some sound effects. Well, the platform is very visual in itself, so it shouldn't be completely impossible to understand what you are saying. Right, so our time is over quite long ago. If you still have questions, feel free to write in our Skype group. I would like to thank you all for coming here today. Thanks, special thanks to those who were participating actively, speaking, giving examples, sharing their stories, their methods. So I think it was really nice to know what other teachers are doing with the same situation. Hopefully you can help your students to switch to English. Well, thanks again. Have a good
Thank you very
evening,
much.
I guess.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Weekend, and talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.